Hello everyone, I hope you're all having a wonderful day today. It's Akisiel here, and today I'll be reacting to Lionel Johnson's Return Explained in Warhammer 40K lore by WesHammer. This was requested by Sir M. Golden on the Discord. And if you guys want to send any requests to me, then the link to the Discord is in the description below. And as always, I recommend you check out the original video. A link to it is in the description box below. So I've enjoyed reacting to WesHammer in the past, such as their like them thinking about whether or not Corvus Corax was some kind of demon Primarch, which I still think it's just as him having warp powers, because all of the Primarchs were in some way Psykers. But with that out of the way, let's begin.
If you somehow managed to miss possibly the biggest thing to happen in all of Warhammer 40k in quite a few years, your old pal Wes is here to inform you that Lionel Johnson, Lord of the First and Primarch of the Dark Angels, has in fact returned to the Warhammer 40k setting. And saying that he's missed out on a lot over the last 10,000 years is a massive understatement. His release was heralded by the final book in the Arcs of Omen series, which happened to come out before his novel, The Lion Son of the Forest, which we're going to be talking about today. It seems like every other lore tuber has already made a video covering the Arcs of Omen book, but nobody's talking about the novel yet. If you've been watching my videos for a long time, you know I get most of my lore from the novels, because that's personally where I get the most enjoyment out of the franchise. If I'm not reading the physical books during the day, I'm falling asleep listening to the Warhammer audiobooks literally every night of my life. Which, now that I think about it, honestly explains a lot. This book came out about a week ago now, and I've already read and listened to it all the way through twice. It's amazing. Mike Brooks is very quickly becoming one of my favorite 40k authors, especially after he hit it out of the park with Brutal Cunning and the Alfarius novel. The Lion Son of the Forest takes place before the Arcs of Omen, and the story literally begins with the lion waking up. So in this video, we're going to find out exactly what happened from the time the lion woke up until his introduction in the Arcs of Omen. And there is a lot of crazy stuff that happens in this book, but that being said, it is a full-length novel, so I'm going to be abridging the absolute hell out of it and just telling you what you need to know. I also kinda sorta stayed up for like 3 days straight making this, so you'll have to excuse me tripping over a few words here and there, and also skipping my normal green screen intros.
I will say, skipping sleep for 3 days to get something done is either a sign you're passionate about something, or one of those cases where you've gotten just so into a task that you just kind of keep going.
I'm gonna be honest with you, it's 6:30 in the morning, I'm exhausted. The idea of being on camera right now is just not gonna happen. But before we get into it, a quick
I mean, totally understandable though, like if you haven't slept for 3 days, not being on camera is totally fine, not something you really have to apologize for.
shout out to this video's sponsor, and then we're gonna dive headfirst into the Grimdark. If it was up to me, I would be playing Warhammer 40k every single day. I've been obsessed with it for 15 years, but unfortunately sometimes life just gets in the way and I don't have the time to dedicate to a full game. That was all until I downloaded Warhammer,
Or in some cases, the budget to get all the minis and the time to paint them.
Tacticus, an amazing free-to-play, fast-paced strategy game set in the grim darkness of the 42nd millennium. It allows me to get my Warhammer fix anytime I need it. The big news this month is that the Dark Angels are finally coming to Tacticus, starting today, April 30th, in a new Battle Pass event where premium pass holders can unlock the legend himself, the Keeper of Truth, Azrael, Supreme Grand Master of the Dark Angels. I got to play around with this dude recently, and he is an absolute monster, which makes sense considering that he's famed for being a tactical genius. His Lion Helm passive grants friendly units a huge boost in damage reduction whenever they block, and also increases all of their Overwatch damage. But his ultimate is where it's really at, as he calls upon the forces of the Raven Wing to deliver death to the enemies of mankind, in the form of a Dark Talon bomber. This thing deals massive damage to everything in a straight line, and if they somehow manage to survive, they'll be hit with the suppressed condition, making them easy prey for the rest of your squad. The new Battle Pass season begins on April 30th, so don't miss this opportunity to unlock Azrael for yourself. The game features dozens of legendary heroes and iconic units from Warhammer 40,000, each one modeled with an expert eye for detail and an art style that makes them look exactly like the miniatures from the tabletop game. It seems simple at first, but Tacticus has a whole lot of overlaid systems that reward smart decision making and clever loadouts. There's also a ton of unique game modes, from arena battles, multiple campaigns, raid bosses, and a whole lot more. You can download the game for free today by clicking on the link in the description or scanning my QR code here on the screen. Big thanks to Warhammer Tacticus for sponsoring this video. Before we dive into the meat and potatoes of this book, I'm going to add a quick segment through the power of editing, because as I was putting the finishing touches on it, I realized that as amazing as this novel is, it's not the best for beginners. It really expects for you to know a lot about the Dark Angels, Lionel Johnson, and the Horus Heresy. So real quick, I'm going to give a summary of his backstory, so if you're brand new to this faction, you'll at least know what we're talking about. The Dark Angels.
Ah yes, it's time for the exposition dump, so that the new people can understand. And maybe there'll be something I didn't know in here.
Were the first legion of Space Marines created by the Emperor of Mankind. They came to replace the Thunder Warriors shortly after the Unification Wars. Because they were the first, they had to be good at everything, capable of handling any situation they might find themselves in. Thus, they were a very jack-of-all-trades style legion. Close quarters combat, siege warfare, guerrilla tactics, whatever you can think of, they had a foundation in it. The legions that would come later were made for much more specific purposes. The Raven Guard, for example, had a greater mastery of stealth-based tactics, and nobody in their right mind would argue that the Dark Angels were better at siege warfare when compared to the Iron Warriors. But even still, because of their adaptability, many Warhammer fans consider the first to also be the best. Their Primarch, Lionel Johnson, whose gene seed was used in their creation, had landed on the
Them being generalists is if I remember correctly, there are two other legions that were also generalists like that. One of them was, of course, the Ultramarines, and the other actually was the Lumina Wolves / Sons of Horus. Although, if I remember correctly, they also favored shock and awe type attacks. So while they were generalists in that they'd have something for every situation, and they also still had a preferred way of doing things. At least that's what I've heard. I'm not too knowledgeable actually about Luna Wolves / Sons of Horus.
The death world of Caliban when all of the Primarchs were scattered. This was a medieval world ruled over by knight households and plagued by great beasts that terrorized the population. Lionel Johnson grew up in the woods, fending for himself against these monsters. He was eventually discovered by one of the knights named Luther, who brought him into their order. It was within this knightly order that, over the years, Lionel Johnson would raise through their ranks and eventually achieve the highest position possible. It was then that he led a great crusade to scour the world of Caliban and kill all of the beasts that plagued it. Shortly after this, the Emperor's ships arrived and the Lion would be taken to Terra, reconnected with his father, and set to lead the Dark Angels as their Primarch. After this, the Dark Angels would fight many battles in the name of the Imperium during and before the Great Crusade, and eventually, when the Horus Heresy came to pass, and 9
that explains actually quite a bit about why the Dark Angels tend to wear those tabards and stuff over their power armor.
of his brothers and their legions turned traitor, the Lion would side with the Imperium. He left a large portion of his legion behind on Caliban in order to garrison it, thus leaving his sons out of the fight. After the Horus Heresy had finally concluded, and the Lion and the Dark Angels that were with him returned to Caliban, he found that his world had not been immune to the seeds of corruption. Luther, the man that had found him in the woods that day and the Lion's oldest friend, had given himself over to the ruinous powers, and spread lies throughout the Dark Angels that had been left behind on Caliban. When the Lion's fleet arrived in orbit, Caliban opened fire. He had been completely caught off guard, so the Lion and the Dark Angels had to defend themselves.
So he goes from losing one dad in the Horus Heresy to then losing his other dad.
They fired back and made planetfall.
I guess you could say he's been double D-dadded and left woefully dadless.
It was like a mini Horus Heresy, Dark Angel against Dark Angel, brother against brother. The Lion would slaughter his way through his own sons, until eventually he reached the traitor Luther in a titanic battle. Luther employed the powers of the warp to apparently mortally wound the Lion. As of the time of recording this, there isn't actually a novel detailing the Battle of Caliban, so we only have the codexes and abridged summaries to go off of. But apparently after wounding the Lion, Luther suddenly realized what he had done and how far he had fallen. He dropped to his knees and refused to fight anymore. This infuriated the Chaos Gods, who subsequently destroyed the planet, ripping it apart at the seams and taking all of the quote-unquote traitor Dark Angels, sucking them up into the warp and scattering them across space and time. The
Oh, okay. I knew about the Fallen getting sucked into the warp and scattered all over the place. I didn't know that about Chaos having a hand in the actual planet being torn apart. I only heard I like what I heard was that the Dark Angels fleet bombarded the planet with so much ordnance that it literally cracked apart.
Lion's ultimate fate was unknown, as he had been on the planet's surface when it began to come apart. Over the next 10,000 years, reports would come in from time to time of one of the traitor Dark Angels being spotted. They had come to be known as the Fallen, and the modern Dark Angel's primary objective was hunting down each and every one of them for their past sins. The Lion's fate was still unknown, but many believed that the
Oh, and for those who don't know, the reason why the Dark Angels are so zealous about hunting down the Fallen is because they believe, if, or so I've been told, or so it's been explained to me, that they believe that if it were ever to be found out that half of their number turned traitor, or that one, it would break the Imperium, like it would cause deal a huge moral blow to the Imperium, and contribute to its disintegration when it was already in a fragile state post Horus Heresy. Yeah. And two, that would result in the entire chapter, or executed, and all records of their existence scrubbed away. Basically, they'd be censured, I think they called it. Which I could honestly see that happening, because there were the Imperium's response to the traitors was, for one, they stopped using gene seed of like the Iron Warriors and other traitor legions, and despite the fact that there were loyalists from those legions, because they didn't want to chance the possibility that there'd be some inherent traitorousness to the gene seed itself.
The Legion's greatest secret lay within the deepest bowels of the Rock, the Dark Angel's fortress monastery, which had actually been a chunk of Caliban. It was here, within its darkest, most restricted section, accessible only by the alien eldritch creatures known simply as the Watchers, that the Lion supposedly slept, until the day that he was needed once again. And that's where our story picks up, so without further ado, let's dive right in. Our story begins in a strange forest. There's an old man here that we as the audience know to be Lionel Johnson. He suddenly finds himself aware. He's been listening to the melody of the forest for as long as he can remember. The birds, the insects, the wind rustling through the trees, and the sound of a nearby river. He doesn't know how long he's been here listening to the song, nor for that matter does he know who he is, what this place is, or how he even got to be here. He looks at himself in the reflection of the water and doesn't recognize the old man looking back at him. But he looks up and sees another man sitting in a boat floating on the river. The man looks hurt, and the Lion attempts to wade out to him, as maybe he can help him figure out what's going on here. There are dark shapes under the water's surface, moving quickly back and forth, and he suddenly sees a figure shrouded in green robes, no larger than a child. It tells him that those things in the water will kill him, and to come back to the safety of the riverbank. He recognizes this creature to be one of the Watchers in the dark, and he can't really remember what they are, but he knows that the Watcher's words should always be heeded. He returns to the riverbank and demands it tell him what is going on. But the Watcher doesn't answer. He can infer that it's not that the Watcher is withholding information, just that there isn't any information to give. Frustrated, he heads off in the opposite direction of the river, deeper into the woods. Fragments of
Well, Lionel Johnson, being not knowing he's an old man, and it's kind of funny. Then again, maybe he hasn't quite noticed the passage of time over the last 10,000 years.
memories start to come back to him over time. He remembers that he has brothers, but he can't remember their faces. He thinks for a moment that he could return to the riverbank and go back to sleep, pretending that none of this had ever happened. But the path of ignorance has never been the lion's way, so he presses on. He never sees the Watcher move, but every time it leaves his sight, it reappears before him in a different location. After a while of chopping through the trees, he eventually comes across a strange beaten path, and at the end of it, he sees a building made of smooth stone. The Watcher speaks within his mind, telling him not to take that path as he isn't strong enough yet. Frustrated, he accuses the Watcher of cautioning him, yet not giving him any kind of information to make sense of his situation. What would the Watcher have him do instead? The Watcher simply tells him to follow his nature. The lion sniffs the air, and where at first he was surrounded by the deep scent of the forest, a combination of life and death, he detects something else, something malignant, horrific, and jarring, something that is wrong and twisted and shouldn't be there. Corruption. He knows what he must do. He knows what his purpose is. He is a hunter, and a new quarry has presented itself. So the lion
Purge the mutant and the witch and the heretic.
runs. He runs towards his prey. As he runs deeper and deeper into the forest, it starts to change and shift around him. Whereas the woods he had been in before seemed vaguely familiar to him, but he didn't know why, this new forest felt completely alien. And all the while, the scent of corruption was growing stronger and stronger. Suddenly, he can make out the faint sounds of people screaming in the distance, and
Wait, I wonder if this has anything to do with the chunks of Caliban that got sucked into the warp. I've heard that Vashtor reassembled those chunks into a gigantic demon engine called Wormwood.
he's overwhelmed with this compulsion to protect those who can't defend themselves. He bursts forward into a clearing and sees a group of what appear to be peasants being attacked by a chaos beast. He's armored, but he doesn't.
Oh yeah, is that a Steed of Slanesh, I think it was called? Or, I think, no, Keepers of Secrets are bipedal, so that's not one.
Doesn't have any weapons. However, that doesn't stop the lion, as he surges forth like a battering ram into the creature's side. As he's fighting it, his helmet ends up getting spattered with blood and obscures his vision, so he tears it off and throws it to one of the peasants, telling him to clean it while he continues to fight, which is a very Lionel Johnson thing to do. Two more of the beasts emerge from the forest, charging straight towards him. The lion fights all three of them off single-handedly, bringing his fist down on the head of one of the beasts so hard that as it strikes the earth, it takes its body a few moments to keep pace. He rips the scorpion-like stinger off the tail of another and throws it like a dagger right into the third beast's mouth. After the creatures are dispatched, the civilians thank him profusely and tell him to come with them to their encampment.
Yep, even without a weapon, and Primarchs, they're strong, and they're faster than you'd expect of something their size.
As it was one of the only safe places left since the sky opened up and the bastards came. They want to introduce him to their protector, and he says that's fine, but he needs them to tell him the name of the planet they're on. They look confused, but they tell him that it's Camarath, a world that the lion had never heard of. They make their way back into the forest, and at the campsite, the lion notes that everyone here looks completely downtrodden. Even the children are only making as much noise as is necessary. Such is the life of a group of people that are constantly being hunted. It's at this point in time that a dark figure in black power armor emerges from one of the tents. The lion assumes it to be the protector of this group, and when the two make eye contact, he immediately recognizes the insignias on his chest and shoulder, a winged sword. In that moment, his mind buckles as a torrent of painful memories come rushing in. Images of a planet coming apart all around him, a sword, the shape of nature changing, a monstrous bat-winged form, a glowing golden presence, a different planet, but this one condemned to death by his own hand, as seen from above, as silvery specks of destruction rain down on its surface, followed by a cascading string of explosions. Caliban, the Emperor, his brothers, that traitor Horus, and the thrice-damned monster Kurz, noble Sanguinius, brash swaggering Russ, and even the insufferable Gilliman. Watching Terra burn because he was too late, and watching his homeworld of Caliban burn around him, facing Luther and seeing the monster his old friend had become. The lion remembers who he is. As his mind is being bombarded with memories, the figure sees the lion's face. He draws his pistols and opens fire.
Oh, one of the Fallen?
However, the lion is way too quick for him. In the microsecond that the Space Marine's fingers began to twitch, he was already moving. He dodges out of the fire in the direction away from the civilians and launches forward, knocking the Space Marine to the ground and disarming him. They both shout traitor at each other. With his memories mostly returned to him, he realizes that he recognizes this individual. It's Zabriel, Terran-born of Stockholm Hive, Diacom of the Order of the Three Keys, Initiate of the Dreadwing, formerly the Host of Bone, Knight of the 2nd Destroyer Squad in the 3rd Company, 15th chapter of the 1st Legion. The peasants are absolutely horrified and beg him to release their protector. The Lion shouts at them that he is a traitor, one who has now tried to murder him for the 2nd time. The pinned Space Marine snarls through his teeth that the Lion was the traitor and accuses him of abandoning his sons, Caliban and the Imperium. Lies, the Lion roars. Then where have you been for 10,000 years? Demands Zabriel. This is the first the Lion has heard of just how much time has passed, and it's left him momentarily paralyzed. He didn't mishear him, he fully absorbs the impact of that sentence. It just shakes him to the core. He demands Zabriel take off his helmet, so his son complies. He sees an aged face, dark skin and hair streaked with gray. He remarks that he's never seen a Space Marine so old before, and reaches up to touch his own face, one that he still doesn't recognize as his own. Zabriel's power armor is scarred and dented, and looks like it's been repaired vastly more times than Legion protocol would allow for. This Space Marine was undoubtedly from his time, so he should be long dead by now. Zabriel explains to him that from his perspective, the events on Caliban were only 400 years ago. That's when the warp spat him back out. It had been 400 long, terrible years of running and hiding from his lethal brothers within the modern Dark Angels chapter. He tells the Lion that the Dark Angels are ruthless in the pursuit of any they deem a foe. But 10,000 years of hatred to extinguish guilt? Truly, my Lord Lion, you have taught your sons well.
What mockery is this? We returned to Caliban from Terra to find the system held against us. You opened fire on us without warning, and your leaders had made pacts with powers I will not name.
The Lion thinks for a moment before
Yes, as the great powers.
asking his new son why he attempted to kill him. The moment he had seen him, he opened fire. Why shouldn't his modern sons hunt down traitors like him? The Primarch and his son go back and forth on the events leading up to Caliban's destruction. From Zabriel's perspective and the other Dark Angels stationed on Caliban, they had been abandoned. They were the finest soldiers ever made, crafted only for battle, and had been left out of the greatest war humanity had ever seen. They were hurt by this, but they were not the ones that decided to open fire on the Lion's fleet when he arrived in orbit above Caliban. That was a decision made by the higher-ups. From his perspective, war had come to Caliban. Fire rained from the sky, and his brothers had landed with the goal of slaughtering them. The first time Zabriel saw his Genesire on Caliban was when the Lion was butchering his way through the Legion's neophytes that had only earned their Dark Angel's colors a few days before.
Oh. So basically, a small group, relatively speaking, opens fire on the fleet, and everyone gets pulled into it. Oh wow! So then, just the number of innocent Dark Angels who got slaughtered or because they got misidentified as being enemies. Yeah, I imagine that, well, for one, the modern Dark Angels are just, they would not accept that as truth, but if they did, oh boy, it's gonna make their need into to seek retribution for their perceived guilt even worse, I imagine.
Even as the planet splintered and the warp reached out to seize us all, it was the expression on your face that has remained with me for the long years since. It was hatred and rage, pure and unfettered. You were intent upon our deaths, and we knew better than any others that once you set your mind on something, you could not be deterred. When I saw you here, having walked out of that forest, I could not mistake your features, despite the age that had overtaken you. Your face was haunted by dreams for centuries. Either you were a chaos-bond mockery of my Primarch, spewed forth from the warp to torment me, or you were the Lion, here to finally kill me. I was prepared to tolerate neither without a fight.
This is a lot for anyone, even a Primarch, to take in, and the biggest stinger is that the Lion detects no falsehoods in his words, and he bitterly admits to himself that he hasn't always been the best judge of character.
You say I abandoned the Imperium.
Yeah, So another reason why people say that while the lion's a great commander and fighter, he's a bit of an ass.
Do you swear to me, by whatever you hold dear, that you remained loyal? That whatever the allegiances of your commanders, that you loved the Emperor and humanity? That you only raised your hand to your brothers and me because you thought you were betrayed in turn?
Zabriel swears that despite everything, he is loyal, but surprisingly, he repeats the lion's own words back to him, demanding to know where his loyalties lied, which, admittedly, irritated the lion to no end. He had never been spoken to by a space marine like that. But he understands where Zabriel is coming from, so he swears to his son that he was and will always be loyal. The lion helps him to his feet and asks him to explain the situation. What had happened to the Imperium and his brothers while he slept? And Zabriel warns him that this is going to be a lot, but
Oh boy, it's going to be a doozy. And I imagine that lion is not going to be pleased when he hears about oh, oh, the oh, the current state of the Imperium.
he does his best to summarize everything, even though, admittedly, there's a lot of blank spots for him, as he hasn't exactly been welcomed with open arms within Imperial territory since his arrival in this time. He tells him that the Emperor is still on the Golden Throne, entombed, and he's not actually sure if he's alive or not, but all of humanity has taken to worshipping him as a god. This makes the lion sick to his stomach, but he goes on. He tells him of the Imperial Creed and the Ecclesiarchy, one of the most dominant powers within the Imperium, a church full of fanatics that are, in his opinion, no better than the word-bearers of their day. To them,
Yep, remember, in the end, Lorgar won technically. Everyone's worshipping the Emperor, treating something that he wrote as gospel.
to deny the Emperor's divinity was a death sentence. He tells him that all of his brothers were gone. It happened in different ways at different times, but they had passed into the realm of myth and legend. The lion is hit with a tidal wave of grief and wonders if it's better to be told of all of your brothers passing at once, or to have been around to see each one of them fall. He doesn't really know the answer. Zabriel continues. He tells him that most of the traitor Primarchs are still alive, but that's all he can really tell. Most of their locations are unknown and they seem to be doing their own thing. If anything, Abaddon the Despoiler was the current largest threat to the Imperium. He tells him that
Ah yes, Failbadon the Harmless, up until the GW decided that to throw him not even a bone, but basically the whole skeleton.
the legions are no more, that they had been broken up into chapters by Lord Gilliman shortly after the heresy. After hearing all of this, the lion says that he must journey to Terra. He has to see the Emperor for himself. And Zabriel tells him that that's not possible, and explains how after the destruction of Cadia, the Great Rift formed and split the galaxy in half. Eventually, the lion has heard enough. Even a Primarch has their limits, and he feels that the revelations for him had only just begun. He assesses the situation. He is a man out of time, and the two of them are cut off from Terra. Travel would be difficult and dangerous, and the fabric of the Imperium was coming apart all around them.
There's also no guarantees that the planet they're on, with all these farms and stuff, that they may, well, they probably at least have like a spaceport or something, but who knows if they have any like ships on hand to even leave the planet with.
He tells Zabriel that if all of his father's work had been destroyed, then he would return to what he knew before he met the Emperor, keeping people safe. His father had been a conqueror, and thus he had been made a conqueror on his behalf. That was not in his nature. He killed enemies, and all of humanity's enemies were his enemies. He tells Zabriel that he will demand nothing of the people from this world, and certainly refuses to be worshipped, but he would kill their oppressors, the warband of the 10,000 eyes that had been preying upon them. He asks Zabriel if he's willing to fight by his side. He tells him that he will, and that these oppressors had a base of operations nearby. The lion and Zabriel travel through the forest towards a Blood Angel's bunker that the warband of the 10,000 Eyes had taken over. Once they get there, they fight their way through, slaughtering cultists and mutants alike. These things are no match for a Primarch, but the lion notices that his fighting capabilities are not what he remembers them to be. There's something wrong with this place. Whether it's the corruption or that there's a witch nearby that is sapping his power, he's not really sure. They eventually reach a room with a group.
It's totally chaos sapping his power, not the fact that he's been asleep for 10,000 years in a rock and gotten very old.
group of Chaos Space Marines, and in the ensuing fight, the Lion is still unarmed, as all of the weapons they've come across in the preceding battles were either viciously corrupted and not safe to be used, or were too small to be wielded by a Primarch. The Lion announces his presence to the shocked Chaos Space Marines and charges into them. After smacking a couple of them around for a bit, he realizes that he's going to need a weapon, so he frantically searches for something that he can use, until eventually he breaks into an armory. The Chaos Space Marines are in pursuit, firing volleys of corrupted ammunition at him. Under normal circumstances, one-on-one, a Space Marine would be no match for a Primarch, but underestimating the enemy has spelled the deaths of narcissistic warlords throughout time.
And the Lion, while powerful, is still unarmed.
They are still dangerous. He picks up some frag grenades and hurls them at his pursuers to buy himself some time, and grabs a bolter magazine in case he's able to find something he can load it into. He's having no luck, and then all of a sudden he has a vision. He can see the forest canopy above his head, and the rockcrete floor that he was walking on blurs slightly and is overlaid with the vision of grass and dirt. To his right, a pile of rubble begins to take the form of a large boulder, and embedded inside of it is an elegant power sword. He reaches out for it
So Lionel Johnson is King Arthur.
and pulls. It slides out with the faintest whisper of metal on stone. It's a beautiful power blade that, oddly enough, is perfectly sized for the Lion. The hilt is a simple crossguard in which is worked a wing design around a miniature version of the sword itself, the symbol of the Dark Angels. The Lion smiles and thumbs the activation rune. The vision of the forest fades away, and he uses the blade that he names Fealty to slaughter the corrupted attackers. He goes to interrogate the last one, who is mortally wounded, and demands to know why he's still fighting at a diminished rate after he had killed the sorcerer. The Chaos Space Marine is choking on his own blood, but even still, he's utterly confused by the statement. He's like, who the hell are you? You came in, slaughtered all of my men like it was nothing, and you speak of having your power diminished? He tells him that he is Lionel Johnson, son of the Emperor and Lord of the First. The Marine is shocked by this statement, but then he starts to laugh at him. He tells him there is no spell, he was just old. The Lion finishes him off. With the Chaos Space Marine threat
There is no spell, you're just old.
taken care of, the Lion and Zabriel push further into the bunker, searching for answers to what happened to the Ruby Crescent Space Marine chapter of the Blood Angels that had been stationed here. Eventually, they find several of
I do get though that the idea they're going for is just that he doesn't really it hasn't really registered with him that it's been 10,000 years that he's been asleep. But still, it's kind of funny him going along, not for so long, not really putting together that he's old now.
them still alive. They've been horrifically twisted and mutated by the warp. They are mindlessly savage, and seeing no other alternative, the Lion grants them the Emperor's mercy. They destroy the bunker,
Ah yes, possessed Marines.
taking with them as many uncorrupted weapons as they can carry to arm the men and women back in the camp. It is after this that the Lion rallies them to his side, as the bunker was only the beginning. They were going to take back their world. A big chunk of time passes, and eventually the Lion and the men and women of the camp are in the process of taking back the very last city. There are still a few remaining pockets of resistance on this world, but most of the Chaos forces have been wiped out. Aside from the Space Marines in the bunker, there hadn't been any sign of the Astartes of the 10,000 Eyes, only the mutants and cultists they had left behind. By this point, the Lion has gathered an enormous force to his side, his numbers growing with each victory.
Ah, so it's time for a holy crusade.
The Lion and a Magos of the Adeptus Mechanicus that they had found in a previous battle journey to the spaceport to see if they can get a signal out. When they get there, the Magos informs him that the cogitators had been horrifically corrupted, and it would take some time with his data scrubbers to get it working again, if it was even possible. The first step of his plan is to get a
Now the question is, corrupted as in like normal data corruption, or corrupted as in chaos?
message out to the rest of the Imperium. Then after that, if they could find a working shuttle, they might just be able to get up to the debris field which is orbiting the planet to see if one of the ships up there could be repaired.
Wait, debris field? I wonder then, like, how important this planet is. Like, if it's a case, like, if it's actually a place that may have been mentioned in the Horus Heresy or something, because it seems like he's not on the rock anymore. or given the way it was described.
At least well enough to get them to the next system. It's at this point in their plan when the men and women of the world present to him a group of 10 of their most elite warriors they call the Lion Guard, to serve as his personal protectors. The Lion argues that out of all of them, he was the one that least needed protection. But Zabriel tells him that within their culture, it's a sign of respect for him, so he allows it. It's at this moment that he feels an overwhelming compulsion to go back in the forest, and he feels something calling to him from the northwestern edge of the city. He doesn't know what it is, or if it's
Is he strong enough for that path that the Watcher said he couldn't take earlier?
even a threat, but he needs to investigate it. So thus him, Zabriel, and the Lion's Guard hop in a Goliath and head for that part of the city. They decide to investigate further by pushing inside of the forest, and the deeper and deeper they go, their equipment starts to behave erratically. Even the targeting arrays in the Lion's helm refuse to lock onto anything. They don't like this, but the Lion is determined to figure out what is calling to him. As they proceed, the forest starts to morph and twist around them, just as it had when the Lion originally left the riverbed. He asks Zabriel if he had to take an estimated guess what this new forest reminded him of. Zabriel confirms his suspicions. It looked like the forest of Caliban from 10,000 years ago. They can hear some great beasts howling off in the distance, which makes the group of humans that are following them nervous, but they continue onward. Once again, they pass by that suspicious dome structure that the Lion had seen at the beginning of the story. He remembers the Watcher's warning that he wasn't yet strong enough to face whatever was inside, and he worries that if the Watcher had spoke the truth, by entering there, he would be putting these people in danger. So they ignore it and continue on the path. Eventually, the forest starts to give way again, the trees becoming far more thin and stretched out. The rich detritus of the forest and the dirt under their feet begins to be replaced with sand. The Lion realizes that he has been teleported once again, just in time for a man in desert garb to approach on a dune buggy, demanding to know who they were. He turns and looks at the man and says that he is Lionel Johnson, son of the Emperor, and he needed to speak to whoever was in charge. It's revealed to us that this is in fact a completely different planet, and the people of this world were not expecting a Primarch, 10 humans, and a Space Marine to show up out of nowhere.
Wait, so there's some kind of, I would assume, warp phenomenon that's connecting in a, I don't, it's like a chunk of Caliban preserved in time for 10,000 years, but linked through like portals or something to other planets that exist in like the modern day of 40K, or well, technically I think it's like the 41st millennium by this point.
A small army arrives to meet them, but when everyone sees Lionel Johnson, their mouths are left agape. They take him back to the planet's capital, where he is greeted at the gate by Marshal Haraj, the leader of the planet after the governor had stepped down when the Great Rift had not faded away, and martial law was determined to be an ongoing necessity. The Lion clearly does not look like a regular person, and he's much larger than even a Space Marine. But aside from his huge stature, this is supposedly a figure from myth and legend that just appeared without warning. The Marshal tells him that,
Yeah, like if King Arthur just showed up in the current day UK.
he's going to need to provide proof of his claim. When he can't provide any other than his word, she says that her psyker was going to have to probe his mind. The Lion is not having any of this. He turns to the portly gentleman and calls him a witch. The man protests, saying that his powers were in fact sanctioned by the Imperium, to which the Lion tells him that that couldn't possibly be true. All psychic powers had been expressly forbidden at the Council of Nicaea, something that had only been briefly overturned in the hour of their darkest need during the Horus Heresy. And even then, it was only Astartes that were permitted to wield such powers, of which this guy clearly was not.
And let's not forget the Navigators and the Astropaths.
Gabriel tells him to consider the situation and convinces him to allow it. He tells the psyker not to linger in his mind any longer than was necessary. He was a man that didn't enjoy sharing his secrets. The psyker's only in his mind for less
I can see where the Dark Angels get that from then.
than 10 seconds before he suddenly drops to his knees, supplicating himself and weeping before him. He says that he is telling the truth. It was Lionel Johnson. All of the onlookers in the room suddenly erupt into applause, some cheering, some crying, all enraptured in an overwhelming sensation of wonder. The Lion notes to himself that even though they were celebrating, nothing of the Imperium's predicament had changed. The Great Rift still split the sky, humanity was besieged on all fronts. But in that moment, for the people in that room, everything had changed. This section of the story
Small victories, take them where you can get them.
concludes with the Marshal instructing her astropathic choir to shout into the void of the Lion's return, his message echoing across the stars. Later on that night, the Lion and
Well, actually, less a small victory, more of a, like, just outright miracle at that point. It's like, the guy's been gone for 10,000 years. Is essentially faded into myth and legend. And well, given that they see the Emperor as a god, and well, see that many people will see the Astartes as and the Primarchs as, well, basically gods among men as well. Yeah, that'd be kind of like if Zeus just descended from Mount Olympus or something. Actually, now I think about it.
Gabriel are discussing what to do next, and earlier in the day, the Lion had asked if this world had come under attack recently. The people here told them that it hadn't, but there had been a strange incident where a ship had touched down in the wastes, but when they went to investigate, there was no one aboard. He finds this strange, because if it had been full of enemies, they definitely would have made their presence known. If it had been Imperial allies, however, they would have reported to the center of command. He reasons that whoever had been aboard that ship was somebody that wanted to go unnoticed. Somebody like Zabriel. The two of them reasoned that there was a possibility it may have been full of other Fallen. So Lion instructs Zabriel to investigate and track them down. The Space Marine sets off into the night, disguised as best as he can be, with a heavy cloak, perhaps to resemble some type of gene-enhanced laborer. He knows the symbols to look for. His brothers would leave markings in certain locations to direct other Fallen to their location. The markings were obscure enough that somebody outside of their order wouldn't exactly know what they were looking at if they happened to stumble across them. Eventually, he tracks down one
So a sort of thing that if you're not in the know would look like gibberish.
of the symbols he's looking for, a set of 3 swords carved into a building near one of the sites of Emperor worship. He follows them for some time and eventually comes to a small house, and when he knocks on the door, he can hear a voice behind him telling him that if he moves, he dies. The voice is pitched low enough that no one other than a Space Marine could hear it. The voice tells him to turn around, and he can just make out the barrel of a gun in a nearby window. He tells the shadowy figure that his name was Brother Zabriel, and he had come in peace. The figure tells him that they're going to see about that. The figure ushers him inside a separate building, and Zabriel is surprised to see that there are 2 more of his kind in here. The third figure enters and recognizes Zabriel, speaking his name. Zabriel asks how he knows him, and he says that he's the one that trained him. He removes his helmet, and Zabriel is shocked to see the face of Knight Sergeant Athkar, who had indeed been his mentor back on Caliban. However, due to Zabriel having been spit out of the warp far earlier than him, he is now hundreds of years older than his former captain. The other 2 Fallen here are named Lohawk, or the Red Whisper as the group likes to call him, and Kai. They had all been spit out of the warp at different times, but had managed to find one another and now work to protect and keep each other safe. Zabriel asked them if they had heard of the Lion's return, and they say they did, but they don't necessarily believe it. He tells them that it's true and that he was there with him. They're all immediately on edge by this statement. They've been hunted by the Dark Angels for a long time, and the last time they saw the Lion, he had tried to kill them.
Also, just a quick side note, I do think that in the Knight Sergeant's helmet, it looks pretty cool, actually.
Tells them that the Lion claims he had remained loyal, and that the Battle of Caliban had been an accident. The planet was the one that fired on his fleet first, and if there had been any treachery, it came from their superiors. They ask him what the Lion's intentions are, and he says quite simply he wants his sons back. He wants to reconcile with them, and he has come to believe that not all of the Fallen were traitors. They eventually agree to go with him to see the Lion. If their Primarch had need of them, their loyalty had never faltered, even after all this time. They would fight by his side once more. Zabriel voxes to the Lion that he had managed to locate 3 of his brothers, and that they would meet him in one of the gardens within the city. Some time passes, and they all arrive at the determined location. The Lion tells the group that he failed his father, that he had failed his brothers, and he didn't want to fail his sons. Knight Sergeant Athkar steps forward and tells him that the sentiment is somewhat late. The Lion tells them that he had been deceived by Horus for years while he pretended to be loyal to the Emperor. He had been deceived by his brothers and was deceived by the powers they served. When he returned to Caliban, it seemed that all of them had been deceived as well. He witnessed Luther wielding foul sorcery that he had only ever seen the traitors use, and he had now come to believe that many of his sons on Caliban had been deceived by him and the higher-ups. Afgar tells the lion that it's very convenient for him to come to that conclusion now, what with the Imperium being in ruins. Where was the benefit of the doubt when he had most of the Legion at his back? The lion sighs and tells them that his upbringing in the woods of Caliban had distilled in him a personality that required acting quickly, and that he admits to having acted too hastily on Caliban. However, Caliban had fired on its own brothers without warning. If they truly believed the fault was his alone, why were they here? Kai steps forward and says that he doesn't believe this is their Primarch. He brandishes a power sword and says that if he truly is the lion, then prove it in combat. Without warning, he lunges forward, the lion bringing up his power sword and activating it in the split second before the two swords make contact. The lion and Kai duel back and forth for a while, and Kai is an incredibly skilled swordsman, but eventually the lion kicks him in the chest so hard he goes flying back 10 feet. He closes the distance, knocks the sword out of his hand, and brings the blade up to Kai's neck. He tells him never to challenge him like that again. Kai laughs and removes his helmet. There's a big smile on his face. He falls to his knees.
That's the line, all right.
Any doubt to the lion's claims immediately having been resolved. He tells the lion that words are easy to utter, but nothing reveals the spirit quite like swordplay. He could have killed him just then, but he didn't, and if his intentions really were to safeguard this world and others, then he pledges his blade to him. Loark, the one they call the Red Whisper, also steps forward and pledges his service to the lion. But the lion doesn't recognize his voice, so he asks him to remove his helmet, to which Loark respectfully declines. He says that he can't. The lion's puzzled by this, but the other two Fallen vouch for him, saying that this is how it's always been since they met him. He always eats his meals in private, and they've never seen his face. The lion tells the group that he will not rule. He has no desire to. He will command those who have a desire to be commanded, and will lead those.
You know, on one hand, and it could just be a personality quirk, but on the other hand, the fact that the lion doesn't recognize his voice and this guy refuses to take off his helmet, it just gives me the feeling something's going on.
Those who will follow. Kai had pledged his services to him, and if both of them vouch for Loark, then he would accept that. But he asks Afgar where he stands. Afgar asks if they encounter more of their kind, will the lion give them the same opportunity they had given them? He tells them that he will, but if they are corrupted, he will not stay his hand. However, he would not assume corruption without proof. Afgar says, if you are not who we thought you were, then we are fools. Fools that fired on their own battle brothers for no reason. The lion tells him not to say for no reason. Say that he was deceived as he was. That he now had the opportunity to atone for whatever mistakes he believed he had made, beside the lion, instead of from the shadows. He tells his sons to come with him. They have a campaign to plan. So this is going to be an abridged version of the next couple of chapters because I don't want this video to go on forever, and I want to save all of the juicy battle scenes for you if you decide to read this book for yourself. But what happens next is a chaos fleet of the 10,000 Eyes attacks the world of Avalis, which is the one that the lion and Zabriel had been teleported to. They were brought here by the Astropathic Choir, as they had heard the lion's message and believed that Avalis was shouting defiance into the stars. Defiance that wouldn't go unchallenged. The planet of Avalis had given the lion control of their fleets, which he used to fight off the invaders. And during the fighting, a group of pirates actually comes to the lion's aid, and it's revealed they are led by other members of the Fallen. After the Void Battle is done, this is where the lion and Zabriel part ways. Zabriel is sent to the moon of Gamma 2, as it is believed there are a couple more members of the Fallen there, whereas the lion agrees to meet with the pirates. We'll talk about what Zabriel gets up to first, and then we'll get back to the lion.
And I think I'll pause here and continue this as a part 2. Because otherwise the whole reaction is gonna end up being over an hour long. But I hope you guys enjoyed it watching with me. It's been fun and listening to and watching Wes's video. And it's well researched and I like the bit of enthusiasm like you can hear in his voice. Well, not that there's any doubt he's enthusiastic about this to work on it for 3 days without sleeping. But anyway, hope you guys enjoyed it watching with me. And if you did, I'd appreciate if you like, comment, and subscribe. Definitely check out the original video, link to it in the description below. And until next time, ta-ta!